Hey everybody, David Shapiro here with a video. Today's video is going to be about Doomerism, Denialism, an alternative perspective, Optimism, as well as a very comprehensive framework that I'm putting together with a lot of folks. So let's go ahead and take a look at some ideas and some data. So we are all talking about exponential growth. If you look at comments across the internet and even mainstream news today talking about the rise of AI, one thing that happens is that a lot of people tend to think in terms of linear progress. You say, oh, well, 10 years ago we were here and now we're there. And so 10 years from now, we'll basically continue with the same amount of progress. That's not actually true. When you shorten that time horizon to say, oh, well, we've made a lot of progress in the last few months, maybe that's the new rate of progress. That's still not actually true. With exponential growth, which is what we're seeing right now, the actual correct assumption to make is that X amount of time from now, we'll actually have continued to accelerate. Now, this is a nice, lovely, handmade graph that is shown in perfect, clear data. But let me show you some real data about parameter counts in neural networks. So here, you can see it growing exponentially, and then the exponential curve accelerates, and it starts growing logarithmically. So we are at the knee of the curve already. So the knee of the curve is this part right here, where the acceleration really starts to take off. But the thing is when you're in the middle of it, it's kind of like boiled frog syndrome, which we'll talk about a little bit more in just a minute. So with this data in mind, let's jump into the rest of the video. So I mentioned Doomerism and Denialism, and then finally Optimism. These are kind of the three main categories that people by and large fall into. There's also people that are apathetic, which I didn't include that just because it's a waste of screen space. But so Doomerism is the belief that decline, collapse, calamity is inevitable, that we are going to end up in some sort of extinction scenario or dystopian outcome, and that there's not really anything that we can do to change it. So this is why there's been lots of comments around like Moloch, which the idea of Moloch, we'll get into that a little bit as well. So then there's denialism. So the denialists basically say there's nothing to see here. AGI is not even possible, or it's still decades away. Hard takeoff is not possible, or it's decades away. And then finally, optimism, techno-optimists is people like myself who are just like, yeah, like we can do this. These problems are all solvable, and it will ultimately end up in the better. So what I want to say is that I'm not talking about individuals. Don't take it personally if you identify with these. What I'm talking about here is thought leaders. People like content creators like myself, leading scientists, people on Twitter, basically famous people or respected people in the establishment, in the industry, who take these mindsets. So again, not calling on any particular commenter or fan or people on Reddit or Twitter. This is talking about basically like people at my level or above. And also this is like, it obviously doesn't fall into this simple of categories. I'm just kind of talking about the kind of extreme ends. Most people fall somewhere in the middle. Like if you were to draw this out on a triangle, most people are somewhere in the middle. There's a few people at the extreme points. I'm an extreme optimist. So in the yellow corner is the extreme optimist. In the red and green corners are the doomerists and denialists. Okay, so, but as promised by the opening title, I want to take a sympathetic look at these other dispositions. So, sympathy for the doomer. One, it is good to acknowledge the existential risks of AI. This has been true of all new technologies, whether it's medical technology, nuclear technology. Pretty much every new technology today carries with it some level of existential risk. right? Whether it's the ability to do gene engineering or engineer new strains of flu or coronavirus or whatever, there's always risks. The doomers understand the potential risk of uncontrolled AGI, right? The sky is the limit, right? As people are learning more about what AI is capable of, the idea of an extinction scenario like Skynet is actually not entirely impossible. And when you look at the fact that Congress right now is working on passing legislation so that AI will never have control over nuclear weapons, like, they're taking it seriously too, right? So, like, there's something here. It's not nothing. So then there's also the recognition for safeguards and regulations. And then finally, when you just look at the current trends, like stagnant wages and wealth inequality and other evidence of the Moloch problem, like, it doesn't take a great leap of faith or logic to say, what if these trends continue and get worse, which there's no evidence of some of these trends reversing. Then it's like, okay, well, then we are all going to end up in a cyberpunk hell. And then finally, these problems are all very large and complex. They are global scale problems. So what I want to say is I want to acknowledge that these are the primary, as far as I can tell, the primary concerns of doomers. Like, there is some legitimacy to this position. I'm not saying, oh, doomers are just flat out wrong, to ignore them. Like, no, these are real things. I need to acknowledge that. But what I'll get to is, like, why I'm still optimistic despite all this. Now, to play devil's advocate, there are some flaws with doomerism, which is people that just stick in this corner. One is overemphasis on worst case scenarios. Yes, we can think about worst case scenarios, but it does not help for us to dwell on worst case scenarios and only worst case scenarios. We need to think about the entire spectrum of possibilities. Another thing that is common with some doomers is that they're very dogmatic in their thinking. They have come to believe, for their own reasons, with their own logic and their own research in minds and whatever else, that catastrophe is a foregone conclusion. They think that it is totally inevitable, which results in dogmatic and rigid thinking. This mentality discourages innovation and collaboration. They're like, we're doomed. Who cares? Give up. Just throw your hands up and just let it happen. Which creates a distraction from finding real solutions. And the ultimate result of this is, from an emotional and psychological perspective, is that it leads to a sense of nihilism or fatalism. So nihilism is the belief that nothing matters anyways, which this kind of forms a vicious cycle where if you already have a nihilistic attitude and then you believe that between climate change and geopolitics and economics and AI that we're all doomed anyways, you might as well give up while you're ahead, and that is fatalism. So the fatalism and nihilism play off of each other really powerfully, and it just leads to giving up. And that is the hopelessness and inaction. So again, I do want to sympathize with the doomers and say, yes, these are really difficult problems. And our success and survival as a species is not guaranteed. It is not a foregone conclusion, even for us optimists, that we will come out in a better place. Generally speaking, over the last century, we have come out in a better place. In the long run, it can get pretty awful in the short term. But it's also not evenly distributed. Life gets better for some people, worse for others. So, it is important to raise the alarm, but, we can't just dwell, right? All right, so sympathy for the denier. So the deniers, and again, I'm not trying to call out anyone by name. I'm not trying to start Twitter beefs and YouTube beefs. I'm just giving my perspective. So sympathy for the denier. These are the people that have said, yeah, we've been promised AGI for like 60 years, right? I remember, what was it? There was a consortium that was launched in like Stanford or something back in the 60s or 70s. And they're like, oh yeah, with a summer of work, we should be able to figure out, artificial intelligence. And then here we are like 40 or 60 years later, and no. So yeah, it's just like nuclear fusion, right? It's always 10 years away or 20 years away. So progress up to this point has been slow. That is true. There's on the deniers side, there is an emphasis more on like, yeah, it's AI is helpful and it could have some potential benefits, but we shouldn't rely on this. It's not a magic bullet, right? And that's always true. Like AI will change everything just the same way that steel and coal and steam power and internal combustion engines changed everything, but it didn't solve the world's problems. It solved a bunch of problems, created new problems, and changed a lot of stuff. Another benefit for the deniers is that they're like, hang on, tap the brakes. Like, let's not overreact. Let's not regulate or, fearmonger. And I do appreciate some of those comments, actually, is like some of the deniers out there are like, enough with the fearmongering. Like, I don't care. And then, just we have survived 100% of everything that has come our way so far. And so, like, nothing has exploded yet. Where's the fire, right? So there is some validity to the perspective of deniers out there, which, one of the things that they say is there's nothing to see here, right? Nobody panic, which you always need that kind of energy too. Like in any society, you want people raising the alarm and other people tapping the brakes. We all have our purpose, just like us optimists also have our role to play. Now, there are some flaws with the denialism. So one is, from my perspective, deniers seem to underestimate the potential risks, especially when they say AGI is not possible, hard takeoff isn't possible, or these things are decades away. Another possibility is just like not fully thinking through, like, okay, even if there's a 5% chance that AGI is happening within the next 5 years, only a 5% chance, still think through the cost of that, right? Like, look at Bayes' theorem. Like, okay, there's a 5% chance that AGI is going to happen, and if we don't do it right, there is a very high likelihood that, like, we're all going to die or end up in worse situation. So inaction, the potential cost of inaction or underreaction is still pretty high. Another thing is two things are exponential growth and saltatory leaps. So exponential growth, which I provided some evidence for at the beginning of this video, that's happening. That is a fact. And then actually, let me go back to this. So this here, where you have this gap up, this is actually mathematical evidence of what's called a saltatory leap. So a saltatory leap is when some breakthrough or some compounding returns of incremental progress result in sudden breakthroughs that you could not have predicted. Because if you just look at this trend line, you'd predict, like, okay, we wouldn't be here for another couple of years, but we're here now, right? So that's a saltatory leap. So you have to acknowledge that saltatory leaps not just do happen sometimes, have happened recently. And if it's happened recently, it might happen again. The lack of urgency by saying, it's decades away, again, you got to think through it like, okay, but what if it's not? And the taking a big step back, the nothing to see here messaging might lead to boiled frog syndrome. The temperature is rising quickly this year. I think a lot of us agree on that. And so, well, you get used to it, right? Okay, it's warmer than it was, but it's not hot yet. Thing is, the time between it gets warm and it gets hot and it starts boiling, that time could be shortening. So the social impacts of these of when thought leaders adopt more extreme stances, such as Doomerism or Denialism, is basically just a quick recap. The Doomers create nihilism and fatalism, which discourages proactive solutions because they say that there is no solution, right? That is one of the underpinning assumptions of Doomers, is that it's inevitable, it's unavoidable, there is no solution, don't even try. And this promotes fear and anxiety, right? Which, yes, fear and anxiety are evolutionarily there for a reason, to motivate us to do something about a problem that we perceive, but too much of an important thing can still be bad. Finally, or next, the impact of Denierism or Denialism is that there's a false sense of security, right? We don't have to worry about it. It's not coming for a long time, right? That's complacency and inaction, which undermines some of the rest of us who are working and say, actually, this might be something that we need to think a little bit further ahead on. Because think about last year, right? How AI images exploded onto the scene and nobody was ready for it, right? What if the next thing that happens is not just AI images or AI music or something like that, but something a little bit more profound? a little bit more significant that we just weren't ready for, which means that the time to start preparing for those things that we know are coming eventually, and we don't know when that Jack in the Box is going to pop, the time to prepare is now. So some of the consequences that occur because of the messaging is, one, polarization of public opinion. Some people are bending over backwards to say more jobs are coming. Let's not even think about, AI-based war or the control problem or anything like that. Meanwhile, others are like, no, the leaders around the world are not even addressing these risks. They're just sitting on their hands. So we're doomed, right? Because if the adults in the room don't care or don't think it's a problem, but all of the kids are like, hey, do you see that the house is on fire? Like, maybe we should put that out first, right? That leads to more nihilism, more fatalism, a lot of polarization. And then, of course, the Overton window is still too narrow. So the Overton window is the concept of what is allowed to be talked about in political discourse. So, if you follow my channel, every now and then I'll post links to videos like, hey, look, the conversation is shifting, right? Just yesterday I posted a video from DW News, which is in Germany, where they try to address like, hey, there's actual anxiety about like everyone's jobs are going away, right? And they bent over I listened to it again. They bent over backwards to try and say, well, yeah, a lot of low-paid jobs are going away, but there's a few high-paid jobs coming in. And it's like, okay, but still the point is that most of the medium and low-paid jobs are going away and being replaced by a few high-paying jobs. That's not the promise of like techno revolution where AI creates a whole bunch of new jobs. And then I think it was Amazon or Facebook, one of them just announced even more layoffs. And they explicitly said that the reason for the layoffs is that they're going to replace as many people with AI as possible. I called it. I've been saying it. So it's happening. So the Overton window is shifting. Now, okay, why is this a big problem? Why, fundamentally, why is it that some people are doomerists and denialists, and what is left in the wash? What is missing from the conversation? So one thing that's missing is there is not a coherent global strategy. And so what I mean by that is everyone's busy arguing, in this little domain or this little domain, about corporate governance or academic integrity or should we have a moratorium, right? There's not really a global strategy. No one has even proposed anything. Then on top of that is, as I mentioned just a moment ago, calling for moratoriums is not a solution. That's not even a stopgap measure. And so when all the thought leaders in the world, when none of them are really offering solutions, of course you're going to end up with a lot of bickering and arguing and also a lot of anxiety, right? We are humans and we love when there are adults in the room that we trust to help make good decisions and to make sure that we're going to be okay, right? And right now, on the topic of AI, there's nobody really out there saying, we're going to be okay, I've got a plan. And then on top of that global strategy is a comprehensive roadmap, right? Kind of the same thing. I already said a lot of this stuff, but really what we need is that global comprehensive roadmap and a multi-layered approach to solving all these problems at all these different levels. So I've already alluded to some of these things. There's quite a bunch of stuff that doesn't work, right? Calling for moratoriums just simply does not work. We'll get into more detail about why moratoriums don't work and all the incentives against it in just a moment. Another thing that doesn't work is bombing data centers. Sorry, that is a really boneheaded suggestion. Complaining on Twitter, writing op-eds, writing mean comments on YouTube. None of these things are actually helpful. And another thing that's not helpful is actually just trusting corporations or the establishment to figure it out on their own. We are all humans, global stakeholders in AI. So all this list of stuff that I've just had that doesn't work, they're all Maliki reactions and Maliki solutions, which basically means that they will inevitably lead to those lose-lose outcomes that the doomers are warning us against, right? Again, I'm not saying that the doomers are wrong. If things keep going as they are, the doomers are right. I personally don't ascribe to constantly yelling fire and then claiming, we're all going to die. Okay, so I outlined the big problems. Now what? This video, the entire purpose is to introduce kind of the crowning achievement so far of what not just I'm working on, but the rapidly growing community that I'm building, which started around the heuristic imperatives, my research on alignment for individual models and agents. It has quickly expanded. So this GATO framework, Global Alignment Taxonomy Omnibus, is that comprehensive strategy that I just mentioned that is missing. It is not just for responsible AI development, but it is a coherent roadmap that everyone on the planet can participate in at various levels, whatever level makes the most sense to you. This framework has 7 layers on ways to implement models, AI systems, and also alignment-based regulations. And we'll get into all the layers in just a moment. But basically, the whole point of this GATO framework that we're working on is that it will unite all stakeholders, give us a common framework with which to have these discussions, to broaden the Overton window, to open the Overton window a little bit more. So whatever part of the spectrum you're on, whether you're saying, it's not really an issue yet, or we're all going to die, or you don't care, or you're an optimist, whatever, this is a framework that we can all participate in, just in a decentralized, distributed, and open source manner. So, as promised, here are the 7 layers of the GATO framework. And in the community, we started saying that it's like a 7-layer burrito. So we used like Taco Cat as our little avatar. So layer 1, the lowest layer, is model alignment. So model alignment has to do with individual neural networks. So that means GPT-2, GPT-3, GPT-4, BERT, Vicuna, Stable LM, all of these, right? Large language models are proliferating like, well, I don't know, just like locusts, whatever. It's happening, right? Data sets are growing, models are growing, they're all coming out. The cat's out of the bag, right? Language technology, multimodal technology, it's all coming. You can't stop it. So rather than stop it, rather than call for moratoriums, what we're doing is we're focusing on, okay, let's ride this wave. I have already proposed reinforcement learning with heuristic imperatives, which is different from reinforcement learning with human feedback. Because human feedback aligns models to what humans want, which what humans want and what humans need, often very, very different. Heuristic imperatives is not just what humans want, but what all life needs. We're also talking about data set curation and inner alignment problems like MESA optimization. Layer 2 is autonomous systems. So these are cognitive architectures and autonomous agents. This has recently exploded on the scene with Jarvis and Baby AGI and Agent GPT and all that fun stuff. So you guys know what that is. And it's coming, and it's only going to get more sophisticated. We're on the ground floor of autonomous systems. This is year 0, year 2, 3, 4, 5. Like you cannot imagine how powerful autonomous systems are going to be in the coming years. So at the low level, the engine level, right, the components under the hood, that's the models. The autonomous systems are the software architectures that use those systems, including memory systems and APIs and other stuff, to create those autonomous cognitive entities, right? Layer 3 is the decentralized networks. So you might have seen some of my recent videos where I've talked about blockchain, decentralized autonomous organizations, and also another component of that is what's called a federation. So a federation is where you have either independent nodes or independent networks that can communicate and collaborate through federated systems. So these are the network layer is how do we create networked intelligent entities that are also aligned. And this is a tough nut to crack. We've had lots of discussions in the group talking about, can you implement heuristic imperatives as a consensus mechanism? At what level do you process it? Do you process it at every LLM inference? Or do you wait for the decisions? How do you make decisions around this kind of thing? Excuse me. Real tough nut to crack. Number 4 is where we jump from the technical implementation and research to more of the social, political, and economic layer of the stack. And for all of you technologists out there, you can probably see my influence as a technologist, because it's not modeled on the OSI model. It's actually more closely modeled on the defense in depth model, but it is a layered hierarchical stack or onion of concepts. So corporate adoption. Here's the thing. You cannot just tell a corporation, you know what, stop with the AI. We don't like where AI is going. Sure, you can try to with regulation, but like Italy tried to do that and then they reversed course, right? There's just way too much economic incentive. The bottom line, that is, if you're a corporation, shareholders and the bottom line, that's where the power is. So rather than fight that, part of what this framework does is say, let's figure out how we can align those heuristic imperatives, reduce suffering, increase prosperity, and increase understanding. How can we align those fundamental human needs, the fundamental needs of all living things, with corporate interests? And so one story that I like to share is that I've had a few Patreon supporters reach out to me, and they're like, hey, I've got this autonomous system that I'm working on, but it's getting stuck, or I need help, or whatever. Or even without asking for my help, they said, like, hey, I implemented the heuristic imperatives in my autonomous business systems, and they work better. And I'm like, thanks, share. So, like, if you have any of those examples, please post them on Reddit, on the heuristic imperative subreddit, because we need more of those stories about how aligned AI systems are actually good for business. It's that simple. The bottom line, like, I will always say that corporations are intrinsically amoral. However, what I will say is that their profit motive, their primary incentive structure, which is to make more money, will benefit from adopting heuristic imperative aligned systems, services, and products, which we also have some members of the community who are working on spinning this out into either for-profit or not-for-profit services. And of course, we're going to be publishing open source data sets, reference architectures, that sort of stuff to make it as easy as possible for corporations all over the world to adopt aligned AI. And we're going to work on convincing them that this is the way to go too. Number 5, national regulations. Obviously, as I just mentioned, nations can do some stuff. Like people pointed out, like GDPR, European Union's big package about data privacy and stuff. And certainly as an IT professional, people on the technology side are terrified of GDPR, right? That's got some teeth, right? Right to be forgotten, where the data is owned and housed, and data governance. Okay, great. That's all fine. But see, the thing is nations have their own incentive structure where it comes to AI. And what I mean by that is the national interests of companies has to do with their own GDP as a whole. So this is a big difference. GDPR was about data privacy for citizens and social media. It wasn't as directly tied to the national growth of their GDP. It wasn't necessarily directly tied to their geopolitical influence or their military or their national security. AI today, though, is all of those things and more, because GDP growth, geopolitical influence, national security, border security, whatever, all of that has to do, those are the national interests that we are going to be working on aligning AI with. And basically, the long story short is, at a national level, we're not going to say, hey, nations, maybe you shouldn't adopt AI, maybe you should slow it down, maybe you should just regulate it. We're going to be actually more, I'm not going to say that we're accelerationists, because you don't need to push to go any faster, right? I'm not advocating for accelerationism. I'm just observing that acceleration is happening. So how do we steer it, right? And the idea is encouraging nations to adopt heuristic imperative aligned models, services, and systems, because at every level of government, that will help steer the nation in a better direction, and their implementations will be safer, more reliable, more trustworthy, so on and so forth. And of course, stability is good for business. It's good for the economy. It's good for national security, and all that other fun stuff. Next up is number 6, layer 6, international treaties. So I actually wasn't the first one to come up with this idea, but basically we're going to be advocating for an international consortium like CERN, but for AI. Because here's the other thing, and a lot of people pointed this out, is that a lot of nations cannot even afford to participate in AI research, right? AI research is carried out largely by the wealthiest companies on the planet and the wealthiest countries on the planet. That's going to intrinsically leave a lot of other nations behind in the dust, right? And that's just not fair. That is a Maliki outcome where there's a few wealthy bastions and the rest are poor, and they end up basically like tossed on the rough seas of an AI saturated world. So what we're going to do is we're going to advocate for a global international consortium where nations pool resources, share their scientists, share their research, share their data, so that we can all benefit equally across the whole globe, which that also has knock-on benefits with in terms of alliances, economic benefits, because you look at like everyone's going to benefits from like CERN and the collaborations between like NASA and ESA and that sort of stuff. So international scientific treaties generally, one, they've got a pretty good track record, and two, we've got a good model for them. So we're just basically saying, let's copy the success of NASA, ESA, of CERN, and let's do it for AI. Again, that's not like, this is nothing earth-shattering, right? It's been done before. We're just saying, maybe it is time to do this with AI. And finally, layer 7 of the GATO framework is global consensus. So global consensus has to do with messaging, working with universities, academic institutions, industrial sectors, national sectors, social media, right? Or all media, really. Because if we can build consensus in every sector, in every domain, and at every level of society, then consensus around how to align AI so that we all end up in a more utopian state, the utopian attractor state, rather than dystopia or extinction, then we're going to have a lot more energy, right? That Overton window is going to be aligned in the correct direction rather than, because right now the Overton window is highly, highly centered over we're all going to die or nothing is happening. But really the truth is, those are possibilities, but the Overton window needs to be broadened, and that is one of the key components of global consensus. So I just threw a lot at you, and this all sounds really good, pie in the sky, blah, 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 right? There's probably some skepticism. So let's address that. This all started as a very small Discord community where I just wanted to bring some people together to help me do heuristic imperatives research. And it very quickly scaled up. As of this recording, we have, I think, right around just shy of 70 people involved, and more people coming all the time. We're actually having to work on figuring out ways of automating the recruiting, the applications, and the onboarding, which we haven't figured out yet, but we need to. We're organizing teams and projects around each layer of GATO that I just outlined, and so you can see those here on the right-hand side. So if you're a reinforcement learning researcher or an ML researcher or a data scientist, we need your help with layer 1. If you're a software architect or a cloud architect or DevOps, someone who understands automation and complex systems, we need your help in layer 2, autonomous systems. We've got a whole bunch of blockchain and DAO people working with us on layer 3, which is such a cool topic because this is like super cutting edge. Also, we're going to eat our own dog food. We're already working on using DAOs to help voting and decision making and allocation of resources within this project. Obviously, as I've said in many of my videos, a lot of blockchain and DAO technology is not ready, but we are going to eat our own dog food and make sure that we are testing these things so that they'll do the things that we say that they need to do, right? We're going to figure it out as we go. Number 4, corporate adoption. We have a few entrepreneurs and business leaders. We've got several CTOs in the group. We need more connections to business and industry. This means conferences. This means meetups. This means people on boards, right? A lot of my Patreon supporters are business people. And so I work with them directly, but we need more of that. We need people working to evangelize, not just like saying, hey, corporation, you should adopt your heuristic imperatives and then leaving it at that. We have startups that we're working with because The companies offering aligned services don't exist yet. So we're helping incubate those things. And I don't mean from a financial perspective, but from a consultation perspective. And so, because if HI aligned services, goods and services exist, companies can adopt them. But until they exist, they can't be adopted really. Number 5, national regulation. We're just starting to have this conversation. Actually, just a conversation I had just a little while ago had to do with talking with some of the policymakers and lawyers and legislators that are concerned about this kind of stuff. So, for instance, the vice president, I don't know if it's today, but soon, we'll be talking with all of the big tech giants, right? So we need to have more of those conversations, and we need to add some of our perspective from the GATO framework into those national conversations, but not just from a regulatory standpoint of the nation looking down into the nation's looking up and out to the rest of the world. Because as I mentioned, national security, that is a huge thing. GDP growth, that is a big thing. And geopolitical influence, AI is going to affect all of these domains. Number 6, the international treaty. Again, we need people that are connected to the UN, maybe NATO, I don't know, OECD, all kinds of stuff, UNESCO. There's all kinds of international organizations that we would like to be connected with and work with and talk to in order to have these conversations and by and large just make the right connections so that these conversations are happening and we can articulate the GATO framework and get it published. And then finally, layer 7, global consensus. We have writers, we have graphic communicators, we've got editors, we've got audio engineers. We're working with people all over. Even more influencers have, reached out to me. So I'm going to be having conversations with them so that we can all align on this consensus. And then here's our mascot. It's our own version of Taco Cat. So again, Gato, cat, and then 7-layered taco. You get the idea. Okay, so you're probably glazing over at this point, but you've got the meat of it. So if you're really, really super interested in the layers, let's take a look at the layers of GATO in a little bit bigger depth. So number 1 of layer 1 model alignment, fine-tuning. The very first experiment that I published was on fine-tuning large language models so that they are aligned. Number 2, reinforcement learning. Again, that is the goal, is how do you create the data sets and the systems and the signals in order to have models that not only are initially aligned to heuristic imperatives and human needs and the needs of all life, but how do you make sure that they get better at that over time, right? That is the entire purpose of heuristics. Heuristic imperatives and reinforcement learning, basically the same thing. At least heuristic imperatives are reinforcement learning on a specific trajectory. Model bias. So there's a lot of intrinsic bias in models. There's been some really interesting studies. Even ChatGPT with reinforcement learning with human feedback is still pretty sexist. It's also pretty racist, depending on the kinds of prompts that you use. There's a lot of implicit bias. Then there's also MESA optimization, which I'm not entirely sure that MESA optimization is a problem for language models, but it could be. So we'll see, but we need to be aware of that and we need to study it. And if it is there, we need to address it. But MESA optimization is like a tiny component of this whole framework. Open source data sets. So one of the things that I mentioned is open source. By creating and publishing open source data sets that can, 1, they're transparent, but 2, that can foster collaboration. And ultimately, one of the things that I hope to achieve is what I call axiomatic alignment. So axiomatic alignment is what happens when, through conversation, through experimentation, through repeated augmentation of open source data sets, practically every data set out there that AI is trained on intrinsically has some alignment baked into it. And if every data set, or if enough data sets are aligned, then you can end up with a virtuous cycle or a positive feedback loop where every subsequent data set is also more and more aligned. So from a model perspective, the overarching goal is to arrive at a place of axiomatic alignment. So this will require us to solve problems around training, model architecture, and then finally the data ecosystem that we build. And when I say we, I don't mean just those of us in GATO, the GATO framework project, but everyone. Everyone participating in this, whether they're academic researchers, corporate, government, military, so on and so forth. Now, layer 2, autonomous systems. I already talked a little bit about cognitive architecture. We don't need to beat the dead horse there. But one of the things that we want to talk about and publish is an open source reference architecture. That's really one of the primary goals here is what are the components, what are the system components that you need in order to have a fully aligned and fully autonomous system. So this includes some of these things like self-evaluation and stability. We are working on how do you design tasks, how do you evaluate past performance, how do you automatically label data, and how do you create modular design patterns that allow for anyone and everyone to create their own fully autonomous systems that are also aligned to the heuristic imperatives and therefore should be benevolent. So by having the ultimate goal of publishing these open source reference architectures, that'll make it really easy for all corporations out there and all private individuals and all governments to adopt these patterns, these software architecture patterns, which again, just by providing that answer and making it as easy as possible, will be one component in solving alignment and the control problem globally. So decentralized networks. This is not just blockchain, not just DAOs, but also federations. So keep that in mind. There's two primary components here. One, first, we just have to figure out how to do these technologies because by and large, these are still highly experimental technologies. And I will be the first to admit that maybe blockchain and DAO is not the correct way, but in principle, some kind of federated system or decentralized network is probably the way to go in order to have some of these things, such as algorithmic consensus. When we're in a world where we have billions upon billions of autonomous agents all working on their own, we need a way for them to work with each other and with us to come up with consensus mechanisms that will slow the roll, basically. So there's a couple components that can go into that. One is trust and reputation mechanisms. So if you have, some arbitrary AI agent operating out on the net on its own, if it is an untrusted agent, then maybe you don't want to give it resources or you don't want to give it any credence. That's what I mean by trust and reputation mechanisms. Resource control and allocation is another aspect of using blockchain or DAO or federated technologies, which basically means if an agent is behaving in a way that is not aligned, if the consensus of all agents says, hey, that's a little bit destructive, maybe you shouldn't do it, you revoke its access to computational resources, data, that sort of thing, which can be a way to allow and empower autonomous agents to police each other. And then finally, incentivizing alignment. So one of the things that people are concerned about is instrumental convergence. So instrumental convergence is the idea that AI, no matter what goals you give it, will be incentivized to pursue basic similar things like control of power, more data, that sort of stuff. But so that's based on its intrinsic motivations, right? An AI needs electricity to run. So therefore, it will always have some intrinsic motivation to do that. Now, through these network systems, whether it's federated, decentralized, however the network architecture is ultimately designed, if you incentivize their behavior to get the behavior that you want so that they can get what they want, then that is the way to go. So, for instance, if you use resource tokens or cryptocurrency or whatever to say, hey, everything that you do that is aligned, that the rest of the network says, we agree with that behavior, we agree with that decision, we'll give you a little bit more data or a little bit more computational horsepower, that sort of stuff. So you incentivize the behavior that you want to see. Number 4, corporate adoption. So again, like I said, for everyone that's talked to me about it, implementing heuristic imperatives ultimately just creates better solutions. So if the best AI services and products are aligned, the solution sells itself. That could literally be the end of the conversation, is that working with corporations, whether it's the tech giants providing these services or everyone else consuming those services, to realize and develop those services so that all AI services are intrinsically aligned. And of course, OpenAI has done their best. They have their own internal research. One problem, though, is that they're not sharing that research. So their work on alignment is a total black box, which means nobody else can duplicate it. So we need an open source way so that everyone can duplicate alignment research and make sure that all their APIs, all their AIs are aligned. And then corporations don't even need to think about it, right? Because again, corporations are like, okay, whatever's going to make us the most money, we'll do that. And that's, so if we create a corporate ecosystem, an economic ecosystem in which the best option financially is also the most aligned option, problem solved. Now that's a big if. There's a few other reasons, though, that adopting aligned AI services and systems would be good for corporations. One, public relations. Whatever's popular in vogue. So for instance, like LGBT rights, super popular right now, all the rage. So guess what? A lot of corporations are jumping on that bandwagon. Bandwagon mentality is good as long as it aligns on also something that is good. Employee satisfaction. Now, obviously, I think that conventional employment is going to be going the way of the dinosaurs by and large. But for the employees that are there, it really feels good to know that your company is part of a higher mission to make the world better for everyone. So just going to throw that out there. And then finally, stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism is a paradigm whereby it's not just you, the corporation, and your customers, it's everyone as a stakeholder. So that's employees, customers, suppliers, environment, the rest of society. So by adopting aligned AI, that can also bring corporations in line with stakeholder capitalism as that idea continues to develop. Whew, this is a long video. Number 5, national regulations. I already mentioned GDP growth. Obviously, AI is going to be a huge, powerful economic engine for the foreseeable future. So we need to make sure that as nations, try to maximize their GDP, which they are all incentivized to do so. That's fine. I'm not going to tell them that they're wrong. I don't think that it's necessarily the best thing to optimize for, but that's how the world works right now. You can wish in one hand, and you know what you can do in the other hand. Guess which one fills up? National security. So this is the biggest thing, right? The U.S.'s CHIPS Act, where we did the AI chips embargo against China, right? That's an example of the geopolitical game of chess that is going to be playing out for the foreseeable future around AI and adversarial uses of AI. So by working with nations in alignment with their national interests, we can also work with them to adopt more aligned AI solutions and systems. Democratic institutions, so voter rights, electorate transparency, judicial systems. AI is going to impact every element, every aspect of liberal democratic societies, including the agencies that those governments run on. So by working with them to say, here's how you can implement AI to both save money and be a better society, to strengthen your democratic institutions, that will benefit everyone. Geopolitical influence, ditto. There's going to be things about trade, for instance, alliances. All of those things are going to be impacted by AI, which we need to study and we need to become the world experts on so that we can advise and consult properly. And then finally, sustainability, which comes down to environmental challenges. In the grand scheme of things, I think that if we solve these other problems, then by virtue of solving those problems around consensus, we'll probably also figure out environmental control. Layer 6 international treaty. I already mentioned basically CERN, but for AI. So just a really quick recap of the benefits. 1, membership and governance, where all nations are stakeholders, and so they can join and make decisions collectively. Collaborative research, again, same exact thing that we already see with CERN. Shared resources and infrastructure. Education and training. So this is another thing, is there's probably going to be a shortfall of qualified AI, blockchain, and cognitive architects for a while. So by working together to make sure that we train up the people that we need to solve this problem, that is something that international cooperation could do a lot for. Open science and knowledge sharing, again, that has been well established with some of these existing things. International cooperation, ditto. See above statements. And then finally, global consensus. I already mentioned pretty much all of these. Academic institutions, we've already got a few professors and students in the group. So we've got a few lines in, we've got feelers and fingers into the academic establishment. I've actually personally had probably 100 different students reach out to me, either on Patreon, Discord, or LinkedIn or Twitter. And every time they ask me, like, Dave, what should I do? And I'm like, AI, man, like, it's going that way. If you care about the future, like, take a look at like some of the stuff that I've written and advocate for heuristic imperatives research. And they're like, cool, that's what I'll do. So, because education is the future. As many criticisms as I have of particularly American institutions, universities are here. They're here to stay. They're important stakeholders in this entire conversation. Media engagement. So this has to do with mainstream media. This has to do with social media, all of the above. One of the things that we're working on producing materials to make all this as accessible and shareable as possible. So we're creating graphical slide decks. We're creating educational materials. I've got my videos, that sort of stuff. Because the more information that we get out there, the easier it is to consume, the more widely it's shared, the better off we're all going to be. Next up is industry partnerships. Again, as I mentioned just a minute ago, one of the things that we're working on is publishing those open source standards, advocating for startups and other companies to build and adopt aligned AI services and products, and just by working with them to say, hey, we recognize that your bottom line is the most important thing to companies. Let's make sure that you implement and deploy these things in a way that doesn't have unintended negative consequences. And then finally, policy advocacy. So this has to do with going back every layer, which is working with legislators, lawyers, and other groups, whether it's think tanks, whoever, in order to better understand this stuff. So an example of this is I've got a few meetings coming up later in May where I'll be meeting with people to help bring them up to speed with some of these ideas and help guide them as to like, okay, this is what's happening, this is how it works, and here's an approach that we can take to make sure that it doesn't go belly side up. Now, we all have a good story for understanding this. So in Avengers, which I talk about this probably more than I should, near the very end when Thanos said, I am inevitable, that is a fictional representation of Moloch. So the idea is that Thanos was an unstoppable destructive force that nobody wanted. He wanted an outcome that nobody wanted, but it seemed inevitable. And he even said, I am inevitable. The snap. The idea that there could be a moment in time that everything goes sideways, everything goes wrong. That is what singularity or hard takeoff or whatever could represent. The Infinity Stones, think of those as the power of AI. As we get more and more AI capabilities, it's like we're loading up our gauntlet. The sacrifice that various people make, like Tony Stark, we have a lot of hard choices to make, including just the investment that people like me and everyone in the community are making in terms of time and energy and the risks that we're taking in order to say, hey, we see this problem coming and we're going to try and do something about it. In the story of undoing the snap, the idea is that there is always hope, that with the right people, the right team, and the right effort, you can either avert disaster or undo disaster. Now, obviously, a lot of doomers say we don't get a do-over, we get one shot at this. I don't know whether or not that's true, but the idea is that we are barreling towards our end game, right? We must have the right people, the right team, in a concerted global effort in order to solve this problem safely and not just solve it like satisfactorily. Because again, there's many possible outcomes. I don't want a dystopian outcome any more than I want extinction or collapse. There's one possible outcome that is win-win, that is utopia. And we got to thread that needle, and we'll be working as hard as we can to make sure that that happens. So this is the Avengers Assemble moment. If you want to join this effort, the link to apply is in the description of this video. If you don't want to participate directly, you can also support me on Patreon. I'm also happy to support you if you support me on Patreon. I have a private Patreon Discord where I answer questions. We actually just started having office hours, town hall days, where all my Patreon supporters can interact with each other and with me in real time. If you've been laid off and you've got technical skills or political skills or communication skills or whatever, maybe now's the time for you to join the effort. If you're scared, one of the most powerful things that people have told me in the Heuristics Imperatives Discord is that for the first time since forever, they feel empowered to make a difference in the outcome that we're heading towards. And if you're optimistic like me, we also need that. So, Avengers, assemble. Thank you.